Nia sat on the low stone stool just outside her hut, the early morning mist still resting gently on the grass like sorrow that refused to lift. The air smelled of damp earth and old fires. Her eyes, swollen and red, stared blankly ahead while her fingers moved mechanically, sweeping leaves off the clay-packed ground. The broom in her hand barely made contact, but she continued as if the motion alone might chase away the ache clinging to her chest. She had buried another dream last night. Her third miscarriage in 2 years. No one spoke of it directly, not even her husband, Cato. The village healer had come, washed her with bitter herbs, whispered words meant to cleanse sadness. But nothing took. The pain remained settled deep inside her, right under the ribs where the child once curled. Cato had not come home. When the rooster crowed, he was still not at her side. She asked his apprentice, a lanky boy with anxious eyes, and he only said Cato had gone into the forest early. Said he needed special wood, the boy murmured. But even he didn't seem convinced. Women passed her compound, buckets balanced on hips. Some offered quick glances, others didn't bother. From somewhere behind the millet field, she heard the soft hum of gossip. 3 times, a woman said. She must have angered her ancestors, replied another. No, maybe her womb is just closed. Some women are not meant to be mothers. The words drifted to her ears, slow and sharp like the thorns that lined her path to the river. But Nia still smiled. Not a broad smile. Not the smile she once wore when Cato carved her name into the side of their marriage bed. Not the smile she had when she first felt the flutter in her belly, tiny and wild like the wings of a trapped sparrow. No, this was a different smile. The one you wear when the world expects your collapse, and you refuse to give them the satisfaction. Even as her hands trembled, she swept. Even as her thighs ached from hours of squatting in grief, she gathered the dry leaves into a pile. Even as blood still marked the hem of her wrapper, she rose to boil water and light the fire. Children passed. One little girl named Pendo, her neighbor's daughter, paused to hand Nia a flower. Mama said to give you this. She said you're brave. Nia took the wilted hibiscus gently. Tell your mama thank you. And thank you, Pendo. The little girl skipped off, her giggles piercing the quiet. For a brief moment, Nia allowed herself to feel the echo of what could have been. Soft feet running, tiny hands pulling her wrapper, little arms wrapping around her waist. That ache was cruel. But she had learned not to stay in it too long. She walked back inside and stared at the woven cot beside the bed. The tiny blanket remained folded neatly. The little pair of sandals Cato had carved for their second child still hung by the window. She didn't have the heart to hide them away yet. Maybe she feared they would disappear forever once placed in the darkness of a trunk. By noon there was still no sign of Cato. No voice calling from the trees. No footsteps on the dusty path. No scent of sawdust that always came before he did. The silence stretched. The women who once laughed with her in the garden no longer stopped to chat. Even the healer avoided her eyes now. It was as if the grief had marked her body with a shadow only the villagers could see. And still she smiled. A woman walked by and paused. How are you today, Nia? I'm sweeping, she answered simply. The woman offered a pitiful smile. You're strong. But strength was not what Nia felt. What she felt was emptiness. Familiar, haunting, but by now, hers. She had named it. Accepted it. Learned to walk beside it. That night, she boiled yams and left a portion for Cato, still hoping he'd return before the fire went cold. She stared at the flickering flame, wondering what part of her had become so easy to leave. But even then, even after 3 losses and 1 more vanishing act, Nia knelt beside her bed, whispered her thanks to the stars, and lay down with her smile barely intact. Because sometimes, surviving in silence was the only voice you had left. The village had begun to breathe again after the last rains, the soil rich with promise and seeds, and yet Nia moved through the days as though she had learned to float just above her sorrow. She helped where she could. On market days she baked sweet millet cakes in the early hours before sunrise, wrapping each one in banana leaves, tying them with thin sisal strings. Children came running when they saw her stall. Auntie Nia, the one with honey? They'd shout and she'd smile always. Always with that smile that looked warm enough to melt the hardest grief. If only anyone knew what it cost her to wear it. She carried her neighbor's toddler while the woman fetched water. She wiped the noses of snot-faced boys as they chased goats through the market lanes. She taught young girls how to grind millet into fine powder, singing as she turned the heavy stone with wide, practiced sweeps. Her voice was soft but sure, carrying melodies from her mother's time, songs meant to soothe babies into dreams and women into courage. But the songs did not soothe her. Not anymore. Because grief clung to her like her own shadow, never ahead of her, never behind her, always just beside her skin. Quiet. Invisible. Intimate. Everywhere she turned, she saw reminders. In the cradle that now held only folded cloth. In the knowing glances of older women who pitied her but said nothing kind. In the growing silence between her and Cato. Especially Cato. He had once been a man of laughter, known for his steady hands and easy talk. But now his voice came in shorter tones, if at all. His hands, once always busy shaping wood, seemed to find more comfort wrapped around a calabash of palm wine. He came home late. Sometimes not at all. And when he was home, the air turned brittle. He rarely touched her. Not the way a husband touches his wife when love is still soft between them. If he lay beside her, it was with a distance that no blanket could bridge. She asked him once quietly after dinner, "Cato, are you angry with me?" He didn't meet her eyes. "No. I'm tired." She nodded. But the silence screamed. Then came the whispers. Her sister-in-law let it slip first after helping Nia at the well. "I only say this because I care for you," she began, not meeting her gaze. "A man needs an heir. You know this. Cato is a good man. He deserves." Nia did not let her finish. She simply nodded and began drawing water again. The rope slipped a little in her hands. The pot tilted. Water spilled back into the well. More whispers followed. Maybe a second wife could bring balance. Maybe the gods did not bless this union fully. "She's sweet, but sweetness cannot make children." The words grew roots. Cato said nothing. But the silence was its own confession. And still Nia smiled. She smiled when the elder asked her to sing at the harvest blessing. She smiled when she carried firewood for her old neighbor. She smiled when she helped braid the hair of the girl who once called her mama, back when she thought Nia's belly would give her a sibling. But at night, when the compound was quiet and Cato was either out or passed out, Nia lit a small clay lamp in the corner of the hut. She picked fresh herbs from her garden, lemon balm, rosemary, and wild basil, and tucked them beneath her pillow. Not just for scent, but for what her grandmother had once told her. Herbs remember what the heart forgets. Lay them where you rest and they will carry your prayers. So Nia whispered. Not loud enough for ears to hear, but strong enough that the ancestors might lean in. She whispered prayers for peace. Prayers for courage. Prayers to be seen not just as a vessel that failed, but as a woman who still carried worth, who still had stories to live even if no child ever called her mama. She whispered her longing into the folds of the pillow and buried her face there until the ache softened. On one night, after hearing Cato return late again, her hands clutched the edge of her sleeping mat, and she fought the urge to scream into the darkness. But instead, she turned and faced the window, watching the moonlight pour in like a silent companion. She did not cry. She had cried enough. Her tears were now stored somewhere unreachable. Instead, she reached for a small woven doll her aunt had given her as a child. Its arms were fraying, the cotton faded, but she held it against her chest as though it might remind her of a time before loss, before silence, before shame. And she smiled again. Not because she felt happy. Not even because she believed things would change. But because somewhere deep inside her, she knew that if she didn't hold on to that smile, she might lose the last piece of herself that still believed she was more than empty. That smile became her armor. And as dawn threatened to rise once again, Nia lay still, her pillow filled with herbs, her heart filled with quiet prayers, and her soul, though cracked, refused to surrender. Because some women smile not because they are whole, but because they are learning how to live broken, beautifully. The air was thick with the scent of fresh earth the morning Mama Shida walked into the village, barefoot, slow, and humming something that sounded like it had been passed from one ancestor to the next. Her hair was wrapped in deep indigo cloth, her wrists layered with copper bangles that clinked when she walked. No one quite knew where she came from, only that the previous midwife had passed quietly in her sleep, and the elders said it was time for fresh hands. The village women, curious but cautious, watched her move from hut to hut, checking on pregnancies, feeling foreheads, teaching girls about cycles and signs. There was something about her presence, like the quiet before rain, the kind that doesn't threaten but still makes everything bloom. It wasn't long before she heard the whispers. She's kind but barren. They say she's lost 3 babies. Her husband no longer comes home. Mama Shida listened without responding. She had heard such voices before in other villages. And always there was one woman behind the whispers, quiet, kind, almost invisible, carrying a grief no one understood. On the 3rd day she walked straight to Nia's compound without warning. Nia was kneeling near her garden, planting sweet potatoes with gentle fingers and a tight jaw. The sun kissed the back of her neck and her wrapper was stained with earth. She didn't look up when she heard the footsteps. Not until she smelled crushed lemongrass and wood smoke. "Are you Nia?" the voice asked. Nia turned, slightly startled. "Yes, Mama." "I'm Mama Shida," the woman said, her voice like warm porridge, thick and nourishing. "I came to meet the woman with the strongest smile in the village." Nia gave a polite chuckle. "Strong or stubborn, I don't know anymore." Mama Shida smiled, sat beside her, and didn't speak for several moments. They both worked in silence, hands in soil, the way women often speak best. Finally Mama Shida said softly, "3 times?" Nia froze for a heartbeat, then nodded. "Your husband?" Nia wiped her forehead with the back of her arm. "He tries, or tried. I don't know anymore." There was a silence again. "Will you let me examine you?" Mama Shida asked gently, not like someone with answers but someone who knew how to search. Inside Nia's hut, she laid her on a woven mat and asked her to breathe slowly. She touched her belly, not coldly like some healers, but with hands that carried stories. After a few long minutes she sat back. "Your womb is tender," she said softly, "but not broken." Nia looked at her, something between hope and disbelief stirring beneath her ribs. "I feel heat in your lower belly. The kind that suggests strain, or something withheld." Nia frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means your body has tried many times to hold life. It also means something is blocking it, not always from inside you." Mama Shida didn't explain further. She had learned to speak carefully. People believed only what their pain would let them. Instead she looked Nia directly in the eyes. "Has your husband ever come with you to the river?" Nia blinked. "No, Mama. Not once. No. He always says he's tired or that he has woodwork." Mama Shida tilted her head. "But he is strong?" "Yes. Eats well? Sleeps well." Nia hesitated. "He eats. Sleeps less now. Drinks more." Mama Shida nodded again as if confirming something. She packed her herbs back into a small pouch. Before she left, she placed a small leaf on Nia's hand. "This," she said, "is from a plant that only blooms where there is honesty. Boil it tonight. Drink it alone. Not because it will heal you, but because it will help you feel what you already know." As she stepped outside, she paused and said over her shoulder, "If the womb has not closed, the heart should not either. You hear me, child?" Nia's eyes brimmed, but she nodded. "I hear you." That night, Nia boiled the leaf. The tea was bitter, almost sour, like truth that one is not ready to taste. She drank it slowly, and with each sip, her mind turned back to all the moments that never made sense. The way Cato never came with her to the healer's hut. The way he always blamed fate, or bad luck. The way he never looked at her when she cried. She had always thought it was her body that failed. But for the first time she wondered, what if it wasn't me? That night she didn't place herbs under her pillow. She placed silence and questions. She didn't cry. She waited. Because now there was a thread of something else winding through her. Not hope. Not yet. But a sharp, slow awareness that truth had begun to stir, and it would not sleep again. The harmattan wind whistled through the tall grass that week, rustling secrets from places even the birds avoided. Nia had begun to listen differently, not just with her ears but with the skin behind them, the silence between words, and the rhythms that used to feel normal but now tapped off beat. Something in her spirit was no longer asleep. It started with Cato sleeping outside. At first he claimed the goats were birthing, that they needed warmth, that he didn't want to disturb her rest. But 3 nights in a row he didn't return to their mat. His scent faded from her blanket. His warmth no longer brushed her feet in the early dawn. The neighbors assumed what most would. She cannot give him children. He must be tired of sadness. But Nia had begun to question what kind of man runs from sadness he helped create. She no longer blamed herself with the same fever. One morning, as she laid freshly cleaned calabashes under the sun, she noticed him speaking to someone in the shadows near the old well. An old man, tall, cloaked in bark cloth with red beads around his neck. They exchanged something wrapped in leaves. Cato didn't see her watching from behind the banana tree. But her eyes caught everything, the tremble in his hand, the urgency in his shoulders. That night, Nia waited until Cato snored from the outer shed, then quietly crept into their hut. It had been months since she looked under his things. Respect, and perhaps resignation, had taught her to ignore the man he was becoming. But tonight, her hands searched like a widow looking for a letter never delivered. Beneath the woven bed mat, her fingers touched something that didn't belong. A small leather pouch tied tight with palm string. Inside, dried roots, unlike any she'd seen in her mother's garden. long bitter-smelling twigs and crushed seed pods wrapped in bark. Nia brought the pouch to Mama Shida at dawn, when the village was still yawning, and no mouths were ready for gossip. Mama Shida took one whiff and her expression dropped into a frown carved with age. "These are not ours," she said. "Not from this soil." "What are they for?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled out a worn book from her traveling pack, leafed through pressed leaves and inked drawings. When she stopped, her finger tapped twice. "These suppress male fertility." Nia blinked. "What?" Mama Shida looked her in the eye. "Not harm, just quiet. If taken regularly, the man cannot plant seed, even in fertile ground." The words hung like wet clothes, heavy, dripping, undeniable. Nia sat down slowly, her knees stiff with the kind of shock that doesn't shout, it just sinks. "All this time," she whispered. "Yes." "So he knew?" "Yes, child." Her hands began to tremble. "He blamed me." Mama Shida's silence was its own confirmation. For a moment, Nia wanted to scream. Not for the lost babies, but for the lost self. The woman she had become, ashamed, avoided, pitted, had grown in soil poisoned by a man's lie. She returned home with the pouch wrapped in banana leaves, her steps numb. The fire was burning low in her outdoor kitchen. She unwrapped the bundle slowly, stared at it one last time, then dropped it into the flames. The roots curled, hissed, popped, and spat. The fire sizzled like it had secrets to confess but no tongue to speak them. And Nia wept, not like a woman broken but like a woman boiling over. Her tears struck the fire with soft hisses. And the smoke rose, curling, ghost-like, around her head, around the moon above, toward the gods she no longer prayed to. It smelled of burnt wood and betrayal. The next morning she didn't wait for Cato to lie. She didn't ask where he had been, or why the goats no longer cried at night. She greeted him with a quiet, firm gaze. "Your seeds never wanted to grow," she said. "You just made me carry the drought." He flinched but said nothing. His mouth twitched as if words were loading, excuses, defenses, stories. But her stare held him like a fence around a thief. She didn't argue. She turned away, the fire behind her still smoldering. And for the first time in 2 years, she smiled a smile not made to convince others she was strong. This one was for her. Because the wall had cracked. And through it, light had begun to bleed. The rain came soft that morning, as if the skies knew the story was about to change. The mist clung to the banana leaves, and the soil smelled like secrets being stirred. Mama Shida had left before dawn, her walking stick clicking against the stone path leading out of the village. No one asked where she was going. They had begun to understand that her footsteps only followed truth. The nearby village of Namoro was smaller, older, where wisdom wore bones and feathers, and silence lived behind every woven curtain. There, tucked under a sacred fig tree, lived Mziwanda, the old medicine man. He welcomed her without surprise. "I felt your coming," he said, not unkindly. "I came for what you gave a man named Cato," she said. He nodded slowly, sighing. "The bitter root of Nyoka vine, the oil of stone fruit seed, and dry ashes of comb bark. A powerful mix." She looked into his eyes. "You gave it knowing what it would do?" "I give what is asked," he replied. "I do not judge the asking." "But you knew it silences the womb by passing through the man." Wanda nodded again. "He said he wanted his wife to stay. That he feared her dying in childbirth like his mother." Mama Shida's breath paused. "Is that what he told you?" The old man squinted at her, eyes milky with age but still sharp beneath. "No. That is what I wanted to believe. But what he said was this: my father told me, your first son will bring your end. I cannot take the risk." A stillness passed between them. One of those sacred pauses when ancestors lean in to listen. Back in the village, Nia knelt by the river washing cassava roots in silence. The water stung her hands that day. Not from cold, but from knowing. Her heart throbbed in her chest like it was trying to break free from the ribs that had caged it. Mama Shida returned quietly and sat beside her without speaking. She didn't need to explain. The truth had arrived before her, riding on the wind. Still, she whispered the words gently, like covering a child with a blanket. "He drugged your food, Nia. The roots, the oil, the bark. All hidden. Mixed with your millet. The herbs suppress the womb, but they don't harm the man." Nia nodded slowly, but her eyes didn't blink. "He feared his first son. Believed he would bring ruin." A long silence. "And I carried the shame," she finally said, voice raw. "I bled and blamed myself. I buried dreams alone. While he—" Her voice broke. Mama Shida touched her shoulder. Some men fear becoming their fathers so much. They end up worse. That evening, Nia sat alone outside her hut, the clay lamp flickering beside her. Her smile was gone now, not the public smile she'd worn like armor, but the quiet one, the true one. Even her shoulders seemed taller, not from pride, but from exhaustion finally choosing to stand. Cato returned after sunset. He walked into the compound whistling, as if his own betrayal hadn't begun to unravel beneath his feet. Nia stood to meet him. "Do you know what I learned today?" He hesitated. "What?" "That you poisoned my dreams because of your fear. That you silenced my womb not out of love, but to run from a shadow." Cato opened his mouth then closed it again. A child in a man's body caught in the light. "I trusted you," she said, voice calm but trembling. "With my body. My soul. My future." He took a step forward. "I only wanted to protect you. I couldn't risk." "Risk what?" She cut him off. "That your son would curse you? Or that he'd be better than you?" Cato's mouth moved again but no sound came. "You watched me grieve," she continued, "and never once did you stop me. You let me carry the weight alone. That is not fear, Cato. That is cowardice." The air between them grew thick. A few neighbors had gathered at the edge of the compound, pretending to look away but straining to hear. "You could have told me," she whispered. "I could have chosen with you. But you made me feel broken." His eyes welled up. "I didn't know how to be different." Nia's face softened but only slightly. "And now I do." She turned away from him, walked into the hut and came back with a small woven bag. It held her cloths, her herbs, and the seed necklace her mother gave her on her wedding day. "You cannot heal what you hide," she said. "And I will no longer sleep beside a man who plants fear where love should grow." He reached for her arm. "Nia, please." She stepped back. "My womb was never the problem. Your silence was." And with that she walked away. Past the fire. Past the neighbors. Past the version of herself that had once knelt at his feet, praying for what he had taken. Mama Shida joined her at the road. "Where will you go?" the older woman asked. Nia looked to the stars. "Somewhere the soil is still honest." That night the village sat quieter than usual. Children whispered. Women wondered. Men shifted uncomfortably. But the truth had already found its legs. And it was walking. With Nia. The sun rose soft and slow that morning, as if it too had questions it needed answered. Smoke curled from the kitchen huts, children chased goats through the dew, and birds sang notes that couldn't reach the heaviness sitting in the bones of the women. Mama Shida sat beneath the talking tree, her walking stick beside her, its carved patterns catching the light. One by one the elder women of the village came at her quiet invitation, not the gossipers, not the loud ones, but the keepers of truth. Women whose hands had caught babies and buried husbands, whose silence held stories the world still hadn't earned. They sat in a circle, mats beneath them, eyes steady. When all had gathered, Shida cleared her throat. "There is something you must hear," she began. "Not for noise. Not for fire. But for justice." They leaned in. She told them of the roots. The bark. The mixture hidden in millet and broth. Of Cato's fear of a prophecy, his father's voice still echoing in his bones. And of Nia, who carried shame that did not belong to her. 3 losses and not once was it her fault. At first, silence wrapped the circle like a cloak. Then came the muttering. Why would a man curse his own legacy? What child brings ruin before they're born? Did he ever love her at all? A strong-shouldered woman named Mwalamu clenched her jaw. Too many men call themselves protectors while planting pain with their own hands. Mama Aking, who had birthed 9 children and buried 3, shook her head slowly. He did not only betray her. He betrayed the women of this village. All of us who teach our daughters to endure love as if it must hurt. There was a silence again, but this time it felt like something rising. Like the earth was listening now too. Mama Shida stood. "Call Nia," she said. The message traveled fast, carried by a young girl with legs like fire and eyes full of wind. Nia came barefoot, unsure, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist. She did not know what waited. But what she saw made her breath catch. The circle of women had changed. Each now wore a strip of red cloth across their shoulders, worn only during ceremonies of cleansing and truth. They rose together as she entered, their feet whispering on the ground. Mama Shida motioned for her to come forward. Without a word, the women placed her in the center. They untied the scarf on her head, letting her thick, coiled hair fall loose. Then came the oils, coconut and shea, scented with lemon leaves and rosemary. They anointed her forehead, her chest, the tops of her feet. Mwalamu, the strong one, took her hand. "You did not fail." You were failed. Mama Aking placed a beaded necklace over Nia's shoulders. Your body was not barren. It was brave. Another elder spoke next. A man who cannot face his future should not be allowed to ruin yours. They dressed her in new cloth, soft cotton dyed in warm browns and yellows. Symbols of harvest. Of resilience. Tears slipped from Nia's eyes. Not from grief, but release. You are not alone, Mama Shida whispered, placing both hands on her shoulders. And you will never be again. A small fire was lit at the center of the circle. Into it, the women threw 3 small pieces of dried bark, the same kind Kato had once hidden under their bed. It cracked and popped as it burned. This is not a curse, said Mama Aking. This is a cleansing. Nia finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse. Why me? The answer came not from one, but from all of them. Because you are strong enough to break what was never yours to carry. The women hummed softly. A song older than the village, passed down from the women who bled and birthed and buried, and still rose. That evening, when the men returned from their fields and workshops, they saw the women gathered like queens under the wide sky. Nia sat in the center, not as a victim but as something sacred. Some men turned their heads. Others watched in quiet awe. But none dared approach. Because that day the women didn't just reclaim Nia. They reclaimed the circle. And they drew it tight. The moon hung high and full, casting a silver glow over the dusty heart of the village square. Fires burned low in clay pots, sending the scent of lemongrass and smoldering wood into the night. It wasn't market day. It wasn't a funeral. But still the people gathered. Even the stars seemed to pause and listen. Mama Shida stood in the center, her shawl wrapped firm around her shoulders, staff planted in the soil like a tree refusing to bend. Beside her stood Nia, dressed in the ceremonial cloth the women had wrapped her in, colors of harvest, of earth, of rebirth. Children were hushed. Elders leaned forward on their stools. The men stood back, arms folded, uncertain. Something was shifting in the air, old truths coming to life under a younger moon. Shida began, voice firm but slow. There are times when silence is wise. But tonight is not one of them. She looked around, locking eyes with the chief, with the elders, with the in-laws who had whispered curses behind closed doors. Then she stepped aside. Nia stepped forward. Her hands trembled but not her voice. She held a palm-sized cloth in one hand, within it, the crumpled piece of paper. She opened it slowly, deliberately, as if unfolding every lie she had been forced to swallow. This, she said, is the recipe. She read it aloud. Herb names most had never heard. Instructions for boiling, steeping, hiding. A dosage for daily use. A final line, scribbled in the same hurried ink, she must never know. Gasps cut through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Whispers erupted. Someone said, "That's a poison." Another muttered, "He fed her that?" As Nia spoke, Kato appeared from the edge of the crowd. He looked wild, his tunic half-buttoned, eyes bloodshot, hands twitching. He shoved his way forward. "Stop," he cried out. "You don't understand." But 2 men grabbed his arms before he could reach Nia. Another elder blocked his path. The villagers no longer looked at him as the noble carpenter. He was something else now. Something exposed. Kato fought against their grip. "I was protecting her. You don't know what was said to me. What was told to me." Mama Shida stepped forward again, her voice sharper now. "Then speak." The crowd went quiet. Kato's chest heaved. "My father told me, long ago, before he died. He said, your first son will bring your downfall. He saw it in the bones. In fire. In the dreams that came to him during the drought." Some people looked at each other. Some scoffed. But many had heard such tales before, from their own fathers, from seers, from fear. "I loved her," Kato said, voice cracking. "But I couldn't risk it. I thought, if I just delayed it long enough, if she just didn't give birth to him, the curse would pass." He looked at Nia then, tears rolling freely. "I didn't want to lose you. But I didn't want to die either." The silence that followed wasn't sympathy. It was stunned grief. Nia's hands were now still, her eyes locked on him, not with hatred, but with the kind of sorrow only betrayal gives birth to. She stepped forward once more. "You didn't just take my children," she said. "You took my hope, my trust, my choice." The women behind her stood. All of them. One by one they moved forward until Nia was no longer alone. Mama Shida raised her voice. "We have lived under stories meant to control us. Your womb is cursed. Your son is a curse. Your silence is protection. But tonight we bury those stories." She faced Kato directly. You are not cursed. You are a coward. A ripple moved through the crowd. Even the chief lowered his eyes. A young girl near the front, barely 13, spoke suddenly, softly but clear. How many more women are eating lies in their food? Her mother clutched her hand, but she didn't stop. How many more men are hiding behind old bones? The question hung heavy. Nia stepped away from the women and faced the village. I am not barren, she said. I am not cursed. I am not ashamed. She reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a small wooden carving, something she had made herself with Sheeta's help. A tiny figure of a child, carved from the heart of a mango tree. I will be a mother. Whether by blood, by heart, or by life. And no man's fear will ever stand in my way again. Sheeta nodded. It ends tonight. The villagers looked at Cato. Not with anger anymore, but with distance. He had removed himself from them the moment he chose fear over truth. That night, the women returned to their homes arm in arm. Nia walked with her head high, children trailing behind her asking questions, reaching for her hand. Cato remained in the square, crouched near the fire, watching it burn lower and lower. No one came to him. Not even his brothers. And above, the moon stayed full. Unblinking. Unapologetic. As if to say, you can hide nothing forever. The drums were not for celebration that morning. They beat slow, deep, and steady, like the sound of hearts preparing for truth. The spiritual court was rare in the village. It was older than the chief's council, older than any scribe's record. It was reserved for moments when a person's actions could tear the spirit of the community itself. And today Cato stood before it. The circle of elders sat beneath the ancient fig tree, cloaked in earth-colored robes, hands resting on carved staffs passed down for generations. Smoke curled from a calabash of burning herbs at the center, and each person who passed into the gathering had to step through its cleansing trail. It was said that no lie could survive inside this circle. Cato, barefoot and silent, stood before them, no longer a craftsman, no longer a husband. Just a man whose shadow had grown too long. The eldest of the council, Babu Kifo, spoke first. His voice was sanded by time, but it still carried weight like thunder. Cato, son of Abura, do you admit what you did? Cato's lips trembled. I do. He did not cry. He did not plead. But he looked smaller than anyone had ever seen him. Another elder spoke. Do you understand the weight of your action, not only against your wife, but against the trust of the people and the spirit of life itself? Cato's voice cracked. I thought I was protecting us both. The elders conferred silently, then Babu Kifo raised his hand. Your thoughts are yours, but your actions are judged here. What you placed in your wife's food, without her consent, without truth, was not only poison to her body, but poison to the sacred bond between man and woman. Another elder added, you treated her womb as a cage, her life as a riddle to solve. You turned fear into control and called it love. The verdict came with no shouting, no spectacle. You are to be exiled beyond the 3 rivers. You may not return until the spirits who protect the village call your name through a dream of one not yet born. Only the innocent may invite you back. The crowd gasped quietly. It was not death, but it was erasure. Cato lowered his head. No one reached for him as he walked away. No brother. No mother. His sandals dragged behind him like a final protest. When he passed by Nia in the crowd he paused, but she did not. She looked straight ahead, her face calm, her body draped in the wrap given only to women who survived great sorrow and still chose to walk forward. That evening the sky turned orange like a quiet fire. The women gathered in the sacred garden near the wellspring. Nia was led barefoot through a corridor of tall grasses, flanked by the elder women, each humming the song of endurance. It was a song only sung for those who had carried grief like a stone, and still planted seeds with their bare hands. They reached the center where the old baobab tree spread wide like an ancestor's embrace. There Mama Sheeta stood waiting, a bowl of scented oils and herbs beside her. Nia was asked to kneel. This is not a cleansing, Mama Sheeta whispered. You were never unclean. This is a marking, so your sorrow becomes your strength. She dipped her fingers into the oil and pressed it gently to Nia's forehead, her chest, her womb, her hands. You are not empty, she said. You are sacred. You are not broken. You are the branch that bends and does not snap. The other women stepped forward. Some knelt beside her, placing their hands on hers. Some cried openly. For the first time in years, Nia's smile returned, not the smile of pretending or surviving, but a soft, trembling smile of finally being seen. This time when she smiled, the village wept. Children watched from the edges, some too young to understand, but all caught in the stillness of something important happening. A girl whispered to her friend, "I want to be like her." Nia looked up at the stars that night, lying on a woven mat under her grandmother's mango tree. She remembered the first time she had felt joy, how it felt like a river. She had forgotten that feeling. But now there was a small trickle again rising. She turned to Mama Shida, who sat beside her, weaving something quietly by lamplight. "Do you think I'll ever be a mother?" Nia asked. Shida smiled without looking up. "You already are." "To who?" "To every woman who thought she was alone. And now knows she isn't, because of you." The stars blinked above, soft as lullabies. The land was quiet as if holding its breath. And somewhere deep in the forest beyond the third river, a man began to weep, but no one heard him. No one needed to. Nia's trial was over. But her story, her true story, had only just begun. The land was dry, full of stones, and forgotten. Just a crooked corner near the market where goats sometimes wandered and weeds outgrew flowers. But Nia stood there one quiet morning, her hands on her hips, the sun soft against her skin, and she whispered, "This will be something." She didn't know exactly what it would be at first. She only knew she needed to plant something where grief had once grown wild. She cleared the patch herself, stone by stone, root by stubborn root. The women in the market watched from under their stalls, whispering at first, "Is she starting a garden? With no child? With no husband?" But Nia only smiled the same small smile she'd worn since the trial. Not the mask she used to wear, but something gentler now, a smile that was rooted in something more enduring than hope. She dug and turned the soil, kneeling in the dust, her skirt streaked in brown and green. Mama Shida brought her cuttings from her herb garden. Children began to linger near the edge, curious. "Can I help?" a small boy asked one day. She handed him a small hoe and said, "Only if you promise not to chase chickens afterward." He grinned wide. "I promise." By the time the first flowers bloomed, word had spread. Nia was planting not just herbs and shade trees but a place, safe, soft, and joyful. She didn't call it a playground. She called it the garden. She built swings from old ropes and wood scraps. She painted stones with bright colors and scattered them in circles for sitting. Someone donated a worn chalkboard. Another brought baskets for resting babies. It became a place where time slowed. Children came first. Then their mothers. Some came to sit while their backs ached from pounding cassava. Some came to cry silently while watching their children giggle over puddles. Some came just to sit next to Nia, whose presence had become like soft rain after heat. She never asked them why they came. She just laid out mats and wiped small noses and taught them how to make dolls from corn husks and cloth. One day, as Nia poured juice into clay cups, a girl no more than 4 tugged her skirt and asked, "Mama Nia, can I have more?" Nia paused. The name hit her like a warm breeze, unexpected, unasked for, but welcome. "Mama Nia," the girl said again, bouncing lightly on her heels. She knelt to the child's height and smiled. "Of course you can, little one." That evening, she sat beneath the shade tree she had planted months before. It was still young, but its roots had begun to grip the earth firmly. She looked out over the garden. Children chasing chickens after all, 2 mothers chatting while their babies napped beside them, laughter rising and falling like birdsong. It wasn't the life she had imagined. But it was beautiful in ways she never could have planned. Every day someone called her Mama Nia. She grew into it. She stitched that title into the edges of her being like a second skin. She wasn't a mother through birth. But she became one through presence, through listening, through planting joy where sorrow had once been sown. Mama Shida said to her once, "There are many ways to carry a child. Some we carry in our arms. Others in the way we show up for the world." And Nia, now seated with a sleeping baby across her lap who was not hers but trusted her, knew that was true. She did not cry anymore when she heard the word, mother. Not because it stopped hurting, but because it started meaning something wider. The garden kept growing. So did the children. And so did she. The letter arrived on a gray morning wrapped in coarse brown cloth, edges burnt like Cato had thought of setting fire to it himself before sending it. The boy who delivered it didn't say much, just pointed to the name etched carefully on the front. Nia. No title. No affection. Just her name, as if he knew she no longer belonged to him. She sat with it for a long time beneath the shade tree in the garden, its leaves rustling softly above her. Around her, laughter rang out, children skipping, women humming, the usual warmth that had become her daily rhythm. But her fingers were still. She opened the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Firm strokes that used to carve dreams into wood now spilled out regrets across paper. Nia, It began, "I never thought I would write this. But exile gives a man time, and silence does not comfort a haunted heart." He wrote of the fear that swallowed him, the prophecy from his dying father, the belief that a son would end him. He spoke of the whispers of the old herbalist who promised safety through secrecy, of how he chose control over love, power over truth. "I poisoned your hopes," he admitted, "not out of hate but out of a fear I could not name aloud. I watched your belly ache and your heart crack and I stayed silent. I feared the child more than I feared losing you." He did not ask to return. He did not say he missed her. He simply asked for forgiveness. "Not so I may come back," he wrote, "but so I may let go of the man I became when I broke you." Nia's hands shook slightly as she reached the last line. Read. "May peace find you before it finds me." She folded the letter slowly, her eyes dry. The ache inside her wasn't rage, it was something more ancient. A kind of mourning that had no name. She rose without a word and walked to the small fire pit near the herb garden. With one smooth motion, she held the paper over the flames. It caught quickly, curling inward as though ashamed. The fire hissed like it recognized her pain. She watched until only ashes remained. One of the elder women who had once wrapped Nia in oils and cloth stood nearby, silently observing. Nia turned to her and said, "Forgiveness is not return. It's release." The woman nodded slowly. "And you have already returned to yourself." That evening, the village gathered not in anger but in reverence. They brought a young tree still wrapped at the base, leaves bright and trembling like new breath. They planted it near the center of the garden, where once only stones and thorns had lived. The village elders spoke softly, "We plant this not to forget pain, but to remember what was planted in its place." One by one, children carried small cups of water. Mothers whispered blessings. Nia knelt, her hands cradling the soil around the sapling like it was something sacred. In that moment she felt the ground receive her past, not to bury it in darkness but to hold it in light. And as the tree settled in, as the wind passed through its leaves like a soft hymn, she knew. Cato had tried to trap life in fear. She had chosen to free it in love. And now something was growing, not just in the garden but deep within her. Something stronger than betrayal, more enduring than pain. Roots of peace. Branches of truth. A life made whole not by what was lost, but by what was planted in its place. She did not carry children in her belly, but she carried a village in her arms. They used to whisper when she passed. Words like barren, unlucky, cursed. They spoke as though motherhood was the only measure of womanhood, as though the absence of a child meant the absence of worth. But what they didn't see, what they were too blind to look closely at, was the quiet power beneath her aching smile. Her smile, once mistaken for foolishness, was the armor of women who survive unspeakable betrayals. It was the kind of smile that didn't come from happiness, but from the refusal to be undone. The kind that women wear when their world crumbles in secret, but they must still fetch water, bake bread, and rock other people's children to sleep while their own dreams lie buried inside them. That smile stood at the edge of her tears and held the flood back, because no one else would. She had mourned in silence, bled behind closed doors, laid awake whispering to herbs and gods and memories. She had hoped even when the soil beneath her womb was dry, and when the only answer to her prayers was another empty cradle. And through it all she had stayed soft. Not weak soft. There is a difference. When the truth broke through, it did not destroy her, it rebuilt her. Because truth, even when painful, is never a curse. It is the beginning of healing. And when it came, when the women gathered, when the moon bore witness, when the man who had poisoned her trust was forced to kneel before what he had broken, Nia did not rise in revenge. She rose in remembrance. Not for what had been taken but for what remained, her dignity, her breath, her strength, her voice. She walked forward, not dragging shame but planting it deep in the soil so that something new could grow in its place. And now, when others speak of loss, they do not whisper her name in pity. They speak it with reverence. They point to the garden she built from barren land, where children now laugh and play, where women find rest, and where wounded hearts go to mend. They say, "That is the woman who did not collapse under sorrow." They say, "That's the woman who turned poison into peace." Because legacy is not only bloodline. Sometimes, it is the way you hold others when your own arms are tired. Sometimes, it is the way you rise after someone tried to bury you. Sometimes, it is the soft strength of a woman who was not chosen by children, but who chose the world anyway. She was not born to be a mother in the way others expected. She became something more. She became a home. And there, in the quiet soil of her suffering, grew the kind of healing that nourishes a generation.